Because caterpillars cease to eat prior to their chrysalis stage, and Denny's caterpillar refused to eat whatever assortment of leaves he tried to tempt it with, Denny knew that he had definitely been preparing its cocoon when he had plucked it from the sassafras branch. It was very restless, almost convulsive now, and within the lamp chimney it humped itself aimlessly from twig to twig, its scaly little claws searching for something to settle upon. After a day of such meandering, the caterpillar settled upon a particular crotch of the twig and commenced to spin its cocoon. By the end of 24 hours, the silken alembic was complete. Though there was now nothing for Denny to observe, he still squatted for hours on end, staring at the cocoon that hung like some parasitic growth from the sassafras twig. His concentration upon the shape was so great, as he sat hunched over it, that his eyes seemed to tear the silken shroud apart, and be intimately exploring the secret that was taking place within. Now Denny spent less and less of the days out in the open searching for more common types of chrysalid with which he was acquainted. Such were for him as garnets would be to a connoisseur of emeralds. His lean, tanned face became puffy, and the palms of his hands were pale and moist. The winter months dragged on, and Denny was as listlessly impatient as what was inside the cocoon. His room was cold and airless, for a constant low temperature must be kept if the cocoon was to lie dormant until spring. His bed was seldom made, and the floor was thick with dust and mud. Once a week the girl left the broom and the dustpan along with clean sheets outside his door, but Denny took only the sheets into his room, where they would collect into a stack on the floor for weeks at a time. His father took no notice of his condition other than to write a postscript to what was otherwise a legal and splenetic letter to his wife that their son looked peaked, and upon receiving an apprehensive reply, he casually asked Danny if he was feeling all right. The boy's affirmative, though non-committal answer seemed to satisfy him, and, dropping a card to his wife to the effect that their son professed to be in sound health, he considered himself released from any further responsibility. When April was about gone, Denny moved his treasure close to the window, where the sun would induce the dormant thing within it into life. In a few days Denny was sure that it was struggling for release, for the cocoon seemed to dance up and down idiotically upon its thread. All that night he kept vigil, his red and swollen eyes focused on the cocoon as upon some hypnotic object. His father ate breakfast alone, and by 9 o'clock showed enough concern to send the servant girl up to see if everything was all right. She hurried back to report that his son was at least still alive enough to be rude to her. The father mumbled something in reply about the boy's mother having shirked her responsibilities. The girl said if it pleased him, she would like to give notice. She was very willing to enumerate the reason why, but the man dismissed her casually with the request that she stay until she found someone to take her place. At 10, Denny was positive that the cocoon was about to break. By 10:30 there was no longer any doubt in his mind. Somewhat before 11, eclosion took place. There was a convulsive moment inside, and the cocoon opened at the top, with a faint rustle of silk. The feathery antennae and the two forelegs issued forth, the legs clutching the cocoon in order to hoist the body through the narrow aperture. The furry, distended abdomen upon which were hinged the crumpled wings were drawn out with effort. Immediately the creature commenced awkwardly to climb the twig from which the cocoon was suspended. Denny watched the procedure in a trance. Having gained the tip of the branch, and unable to proceed farther, the insect rested, its wings hanging moist and heavy from its bloated body. The abdomen, with each pulsation, shrank visibly and gradually, very gradually, the antennae unfurled, and the wings expanded, with juices pumped into them from the body. Within an hour the metamorphosis of many months was complete. The beast, its wings still slightly damp, though fully spread, fluttered gently before the eyes of the boy. Though escaped from its cocoon, it lay imprisoned still beneath the glass. Danny's pallor was suddenly flushed. He grasped the lamp chimney, as if he would hold the insect to him. This was his miracle, his alone. He watched with a possessive awe as the creature flexed its wings, although it was still too weak to attempt flight. Surely this specimen before him was unique. The wings were easily 10 inches across, and their color was so subtly graduated that it was impossible to say where the black turned to purple, and purple to green, and green back to black. The only definite delineations were a crab-like simulacrum centered on each wing and upon each forewing, the imitation of an open mouth with teeth bared. Both the crabs and the mouths were chalked in white and vermilion. By noon, Denny was hungry, so he overcame his nervous exhaustion that he almost yet so overcome with nervous exhaustion that he almost decided to forego the midday meal. Aware, however, that an absence from 2 meals running would surely precipitate an intrusion by his father with the servant girl as proxy, he reluctantly left his room and went downstairs to face his father over luncheon. Despite his compliance, his father was immediately aware of the transformation in his son. Spring seems to have put new life into the lad," he said, turning over the page of the book. "You're like your mother in that respect. And in that respect only, thank God. She never did so well in cold weather." It was the first time he had mentioned the mother to the son since he had been forced to explain her departure obliquely some 5 years before. The boy was shocked, but as the opportunity had arisen, he hastily decided to follow up the mention of his mother. It was unseemly that he should disclose any sentiment, so he hesitated and calculated before putting his question. "Why doesn't she write or send me presents?" he asked. His father's pause made him almost unbearably aware of the man's chagrin in having opened the subject. He didn't look up at the boy as he answered, "Because legally she is not allowed to." The remainder of the meal was passed in silent and mutual embarrassment. Denny returned to his room as soon as he could respectfully quit the table, and while unlocking the door for an awful moment, the possibility that the moth might have escaped, might never have been there, scorched Denny's mind. But it was there, almost as he had left it, only now it had changed its position, the spread of its wings being nearly horizontal, and in this position Denny realized that the lamp chimney was too narrow to allow it free movement. There was no receptacle in the room any larger, and in Denny's mind there paraded the various jars, the vases, and other vessels in the house that had from time to time in the past served as enclosures for his specimens. None of them was large enough without sufficient room. The moth, as soon as it attempted flight, would in no time at all damage its wings. In a kind of frenzy, Danny racked his brains for the memory of some container that would satisfy his need. Like a ferret, his thoughts suddenly pounced on what had eluded them. In his father's room, a huge crystal tobacco jar with a lid of repoussed silver stood on an ebony tabaret beneath the smirking head of a tiger. There was no time to lose, for within 5 hours after emerging from the cocoon, a moth will try its wings in flight. Breathlessly, Danny bounded down the stairs, and for a moment only hesitated before he knocked upon his father's door. "Yes?" his father asked querulously, and Danny turned the knob and walked in. "Father," he began, but he had not as yet caught his breath. "Speak up, boy. Stop shaking." "Why, even confronted by a rogue elephant, I never shook so. I want to borrow something," the boy managed to stammer. Be more explicit. Be more explicit. What do you want? A ticket to Fall River, a $100 bill, a dose of Ipecac? The last would seem the most logical, to judge from your looks." Hating his father as he had never hated him before, the boy spoke up. "I want to borrow your tobacco jar." "Which one?" his father parried. "The elephant foot the president gave me? The Benares brass? The Dutch pottery one? The music box?" The boy could bear this bantering no longer. "I want that one." He pointed directly where it stood, half full of tobacco. "What for?" his father asked. The boy's bravura was suddenly extinguished. "Speak up! If you make an extraordinary request, you must be ready to back it up with a motive." "I want it for a specimen." "What's wrong with all the containers you already have appropriated from the kitchen, pantry, and parlor?" Denny would not say they were not big enough. It might arouse sufficient interest within his father so that he would insist on seeing for himself what this monster was. Denny had a vision of his father grabbing the moth and hastening to impale it upon the study wall. adding it to his other conquests. They won't do, Denny said. Why won't they do? They just won't. Be explicit, his father thundered at him. I want to put some stuff in it that won't fit in the others. You will stand where you are without